I was 22, working two part-time jobs that together gave me just enough to keep my head above water and send $300 home to my mom every month. The Kroger on Salem Avenue had me stocking shelves 4 days a week, and on weekends I drove delivery routes for a print shop on the south side. The money was tight, but it was steady, and steady was what mattered when your mom was 3 months behind on the gas bill and winter wasn't finished yet. I knew the exact balance on her account because I was the one who called the utility company when she couldn't. $47 past due in February, then $112, then $198. By the time March rolled around, I was looking at that number the way you look at a leak in the ceiling, knowing it's only going to get worse. The laundromat on Gettysburg Avenue had a corkboard outside, one of those community boards where people pinned up ads for yard sales and guitar lessons and rooms for rent. I stopped there on a Tuesday morning between shifts to grab a coffee from the gas station next door, and that's when I saw the card. It was handwritten, white cardstock, pinned up with a red thumbtack in the bottom right corner of the board. The ink was blue ballpoint, neat block letters. Facility monitor, Kellner Cold Storage, Reed Falls, nights, cash, weekly, call to start. Below that, a local number, no address, no application form, no details about what the job actually involved. I stood there with my coffee getting cold in my hand, reading it twice to make sure I wasn't missing something. Facility monitor. That could mean anything. Nights meant I could keep my day shift at the Kroger. Cash weekly meant no taxes, no paperwork, no waiting 2 weeks for a paycheck. And Reed Falls was maybe an hour north, close enough to make the drive worth it if the pay was decent. I pulled out my phone and called the number right there in the parking lot. It rang twice before a man answered. "This is Herman." His voice was low and dry, the kind of voice that didn't waste words. "I'm calling about the facility monitor job," I said. "The card on Gettysburg." "Can you drive to Reed Falls?" "Yes." "Can you start tonight?" I hesitated, but only for a second. My next Kroger shift wasn't until Thursday. The print shop didn't need me until Saturday, and I needed the money more than I needed to know what I was walking into. "Yes," I said. $200 cash for one night. You'll meet me at the site at 11. I'll text you the address." "What is the job?" "Everything you need is on the card when you get here," he said. "See you tonight." He hung up before I could ask another question. I stood there staring at my phone, the dead line buzzing in my ear. 60 seconds, maybe less. $200 for one night. I'd just made more per hour on a phone call than I made stocking shelves, and I didn't even know what the job was yet. I didn't care. The number was 200, and the number my mom owed was 198, and that was all the math I needed. When I got home, I called her. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey, baby." "Hey, Mom, I picked up a one-night warehouse gig tonight. I'll call you in the morning." There was a pause. Not long, just enough for me to know she was weighing whether to ask. "A warehouse gig," she said. "That sounds good. You eating before you go?" "Yeah, I will." "Good. Drive safe." "I will." She hung up. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and looked at the time. It was a little past noon. I had 10 hours before I needed to leave. I didn't eat. At 9:30, I got in my car and headed north on I-75, then cut east on State Route 40 toward Reed Falls. The town wasn't much of a town, just a cluster of houses and a gas station and a post office that probably closed at 4. The county road that branched off Route 40 didn't have a sign, just a gap in the trees and a strip of worn asphalt that looked like it hadn't been repaved in 20 years. I followed it for a mile and a half, maybe a little more, until the trees gave way to a flat stretch of cleared land and a building came into view. It was low and wide, concrete, windowless. No signage, no lights except for a single floodlight over the loading dock at the far end. The kind of building you could drive past 100 times and never notice, because there was nothing about it that wanted to be noticed. I pulled into the gravel lot and cut the engine. Herman was already there, standing at the loading dock with his hands in his jacket pockets, like he'd been waiting without impatience for some time. Herman led me into the building without ceremony. He moved at a steady pace, not hurried, but never pausing, and I fell in step behind him. The entrance opened into a central hallway that stretched deep into the building, and the cold hit me immediately. Not the sharp bite of winter air, but something heavier, something that sat in your chest and made you breathe shallow. 5 corridors branched off the hallway, each one lined floor to ceiling with steel shelving. The pallets stacked on them were wrapped in thick, opaque plastic, industrial grade, the kind that didn't let you see what was underneath. I couldn't make out shapes or labels or anything that would tell me what this place was storing. Herman didn't slow down as we passed each corridor, didn't point anything out, and I didn't have time to stop and look closer. The building felt larger on the inside than it had from the parking lot, the hallways stretching back farther than they should have. At the center of the building, Herman stopped in front of a glass-walled room, the monitor station. It was small, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, with clear walls on 3 sides and a single door facing the hallway. Inside, I could see a metal folding chair, a portable space heater plugged into the wall, and a desk with a monitor showing 4 separate camera feeds in a grid. "You'll be in here," Herman said. He opened the door and stepped inside, and I followed. The space heater was already running, making a low electric hum that filled the silence. The monitor on the desk cycled through the 4 feeds without sound. Corridor 1, Corridor 2, Corridor 3, Corridor 4. Each one showed the same thing. Empty aisles, steel shelving, overhead lights casting long shadows across the concrete floor. "Cameras cover the first 4 corridors," Herman said, gesturing at the screen. "Loading dock control is here." He pointed to a panel on the wall beside the monitor. It had a numeric keypad and a status indicator that currently read "sealed" in green letters. Below that were rows of buttons I didn't recognize. "Cold room 5 is at the end of the hall," Herman added, though he didn't turn to look at it. "You won't need to go in there." I glanced past him, through the glass wall of the monitor station, and saw the door at the far end of the hallway. It was heavy, insulated, the kind of door you'd find on a walk-in freezer. The paint was faded, but I could still make out the stenciled letters. Cold Room 5. A padlock hung through the handle. Herman pulled a laminated card from his jacket pocket and set it on the desk beside the monitor. White cardstock, sealed in plastic, with black text printed across the top in capital letters. Night Monitor Guidelines. Read first. "Everything you need is on there," he said. I looked at the card, then back at him. "What am I?" But Herman was already moving toward the door. He stepped out into the hallway, his boots making soft echoes on the concrete, and walked toward the loading dock without looking back. I heard the heavy clunk of the dock ceiling, the sound of a lock engaging, and then silence. I was alone. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the space heater and the faint buzz of the overhead lights. The building felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that made you aware of your own breathing. I sat down in the folding chair and picked up the laminated card. The first rule was printed near the top, in the same bold capital letters as the title. Rule 1. A man in a yellow hard hat will knock on the monitor station window at 1 a.m. and say he needs to clock out. Tell him through the glass, without opening the door, that no one can leave until the loading dock seals at 4 a.m. Do not let him in. I read it twice. The specificity of it, yellow hard hat, 1 in the morning, the exact words I was supposed to say, felt wrong. It wasn't written like a guideline. It was written like a script. I kept reading. Rule 2. Sounds from Cold Room 5 between 2 and 3 a.m. are a normal part of facility operations. The padlock must not be opened for any reason during this window. Rule 3. If the camera feed for corridor 3 shows a figure matching your description, stand completely still and do not take your eyes off the screen until the figure is no longer visible. I stopped, read it again. A figure matching your description. I looked up at the monitor. The camera 3 feed was in the bottom left corner of the screen, showing an empty corridor. The overhead lights were on. The shelving was still. There was nothing there. I went back to the card. Rule 4. The loading dock will attempt to unseal between 3 and 4 a.m. Do not allow it. The panel override code is 1988. I set the card down on the desk, my hands steady but my mind racing. The rules didn't make sense. A man in a yellow hard hat. A figure matching my description. The dock trying to open on its own. None of it made sense. I looked at the monitor again. 4 feeds, 4 empty corridors. The space heater hummed. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. The building was silent and still. I picked up the card and read Rule 3 one more time, just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood it. I hadn't. I looked at the camera 3 feed. The corridor was empty. The lights were on. The shelving was still. I sat back in the folding chair, the laminated card in my hand, and stared at the screen. I'd been watching the cameras for almost 2 hours when the knock came, and I wasn't ready for it. The sound hit the glass hard enough that I jerked upright. The folding chair scraped backward across the concrete floor with a metal shriek that made me wince. My hand went to the edge of the desk to steady myself. Through the monitor station window stood a man in a yellow hard hat. He was ordinary, mid-50s maybe. A lined face that had seen a lot of outdoor work, tired eyes, the kind of weathered look I'd seen on every loading dock and warehouse floor I'd ever been near. He could have been anyone. He could have been my uncle. He could have been the guy who delivered pallets to the Kroger back lot on Tuesdays. He raised one hand in a little wave, smiled, and spoke through the glass. "My shift ended an hour ago," he said. His voice was muffled but clear, pleasant, not angry. "I just need to clock out and get home." I looked at the clock on the monitor. 12:40 a.m., 20 minutes early. The card had said 1 a.m. It had said a man in a yellow hard hat would knock at 1 a.m., not 12:40. And I'd been sitting here rehearsing what I would say when he arrived, going over the wording in my head so I wouldn't stumble. But he was here now, and I was supposed to tell him something. I cleared my throat. "No one can leave the building until 4 a.m., I said through the glass. I kept my voice level. "When the dock seals." The man nodded slowly, like he'd heard this before and wasn't surprised. Like maybe he'd been told the exact same thing last week, or the week before that. "It's doing it again, huh?" he said. Not a question, just a statement. Then he sat down on the floor in the corridor outside the monitor station, back against the glass, and settled in to wait. I stood there for a moment, watching him through the window. He didn't look upset. He didn't pull out a phone or check his watch. He just sat with his hands in his lap and stared at the opposite wall. I sat back down in the folding chair, slowly this time, and switched my view to camera 2. The man was visible on the feed now, sitting exactly where I'd just seen him through the glass. The camera angle caught him from the side. He didn't move. He didn't shift his weight or adjust his hard hat or do any of the small, restless things people do when they're forced to wait. He just sat. I checked the other cameras. Corridor 1 was empty. Corridor 3 was empty. Corridor 4 showed the same stacks of shrink-wrapped pallets I'd been staring at all night, the plastic catching the overhead lights in dull white reflections. I went back to camera 2. The man was still sitting. 5 minutes passed. 10. I kept waiting for him to get up, or to turn around and knock on the glass again, or to start pacing. People don't sit that still. People fidget. They check their pockets. They sigh. This man did none of that. 15 minutes. I glanced at the laminated card on the desk. Rule 1 didn't say what happened after you told him he couldn't leave. It just said to tell him and not to let him in. It didn't say he would sit down and wait. It didn't say he would accept it without argument. 20 minutes. At exactly 1 a.m., the man stood up. He didn't look back at the monitor station. He didn't say anything. He just got to his feet, brushed off his work trousers, and started walking toward the far end of Corridor 2. I leaned forward in the chair, eyes on the Camera 2 feed. The corridor ended in a concrete wall. No door, no seam, just flat gray concrete under a single overhead light. The man reached the wall and kept walking. He didn't slow down. He didn't put his hands out to brace himself. He walked straight into the concrete like it wasn't there. And then he was gone. Not through a door, through the wall. I stared at the feed. The corridor was empty. The wall was solid. The light overhead flickered once, then held steady. I switched to Camera 1, empty. Camera 3, empty. Camera 4. The hallway past Cold Room 5, nothing moving. Back to Camera 2, still empty. I sat back in the chair and realized my hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the desk to make them stop. The card had said a man in a yellow hard hat would knock at 1 a.m. It had said to tell him he couldn't leave until 4. It hadn't said he would walk through a wall. It hadn't said where he would go, or what he was, or whether I should be worried that he was still somewhere in the building, even though he'd just walked through solid concrete. I pulled a pen from my jacket pocket and uncapped it. My hand was still shaking, but I managed to write on the back of my left hand in small, cramped letters, 1 a.m., wall, C2. I capped the pen and set it down. The building was quiet. The refrigeration hum was steady and low, the same sound it had been since I'd arrived. The monitors cycled through their feeds in silence. I sat in the folding chair with the note on my hand, staring at the empty Corridor 2 on Camera 2, and told myself that the next 3 hours would be fine. I didn't believe it. At 2:05 in the morning, sounds began from Cold Room 5. Not the refrigeration hum, which had been constant since I arrived. Low and mechanical, the kind of white noise that disappears into itself after the first hour. This was different. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, walking the length of the room in a measured back-and-forth pattern. Someone pacing. I leaned forward in the folding chair, watching the Camera 4 feed. The corridor was empty. The padlock hung through the door handle, exactly where it had been since Herman walked me through the building. The stenciled letters, Cold Room 5, were barely visible under the overhead light. The footsteps continued, steady, unhurried. The sound came through the monitor's speaker with a muffled quality, like it was traveling through insulation and concrete before reaching me. But it was clear enough. Someone was walking in there. I checked the card again, even though I'd already memorized Rule 2. Sounds from Cold Room 5 between 2 and 3 a.m. are a normal part of facility operations. The padlock must not be opened for any reason during this window. Normal operations. I looked at the empty corridor on Camera 4, then at the padlock, still closed. The footsteps kept going, back and forth, back and forth. I counted the rhythm without meaning to. 8 paces in one direction, a pause, 8 paces back, over and over. I didn't move toward the door. 17 minutes passed that way. I watched the padlock and listened to the footsteps and kept my hands flat on the monitor desk. The space heater buzzed next to my leg. The refrigeration hum layered underneath everything else, steady and low. At 2:22, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I held my breath, waiting for them to start again, but they didn't. Then something struck the inside of the door. Not a knock, an impact, like something large and heavy had been thrown against it from the other side. The door flexed outward in its frame. I watched it happen on Camera 4, the whole door bowing out. the metal frame straining against the concrete. The padlock pulled tight, but held. The door settled back. I stared at the screen. My hands were still flat on the desk. I didn't move toward it. The silence stretched out again. 1 minute. 2. The refrigeration hum filled the space where the footsteps had been. At 2:41, a voice came from inside cold room 5. Muffled at first. Indistinct. I leaned toward the monitor's speaker, trying to make it out. The sound was low and distorted, like someone speaking through layers of fabric or frost-coated steel. Then it said my name. Mark Clark. Not Mark. Not Clark alone. Both names. Full and clear. The stress on the first syllable of Clark, the way Anne said it. The way she'd been saying it since I was a kid. The way no one else ever got right. Not the flat way strangers read it off a list or a name tag. The way someone who knew me would say it. I sat back in the chair. Herman had never asked my name. Not during the phone call, not during the walkthrough. The job listing had no application, no form to fill out. No one at this facility had my name. No one here knew me at all. I looked at the camera 4 feed. The padlock was still closed. The corridor was empty. The door was still. I didn't go to it. The voice didn't speak again. I sat in the folding chair with the camera 4 feed filling the monitor. The padlock closed, the door still, the corridor silent, and waited. At 3:07 in the morning, the loading dock panel lit up on its own. Amber warning lights ran across the top row, each one blinking in sequence. The dock status indicator cycled from sealed to unsealing, the letters bright and mechanical against the dark plastic housing. I crossed to the panel and punched in 1988. The amber lights went out. The status indicator returned to sealed. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Behind me, all 4 camera feeds cut to static. The monitors went white and gray at the same time, that dead television snow filling every screen. Then camera 3 came back alone. Clear, normal resolution. Corridor 3 appeared on the feed, the overhead lights casting their usual flat glow across the shelving. Standing under the 3rd light, back to the camera, was a figure wearing my exact clothes. The same gray jacket with the fraying left cuff, the same dark jeans, the same white sneakers with the scuff on the right toe. Rule 3 came back to me word for word. Stand completely still and do not take your eyes off the screen until the figure is no longer visible. I stood in front of the monitor and watched. The figure didn't move. 4 minutes passed, maybe longer. I counted the seconds in my head at first, then stopped counting and just kept my eyes on the screen. The corridor was silent. The figure's back was to the camera. I could see the fraying cuff on the left sleeve, the exact spot where the fabric had started to come apart after catching on a loading dock latch 2 months ago. Then it turned around. Its face was my face. Not similar, not close. Exact. The same broad nose, the same jaw, the same dark eyes. But it was smiling at something above and behind the camera, not at the lens. The smile was already there when the face came around, like it had been smiling the whole time and I was only now seeing it. The figure reached up and took hold of the overhead light fixture above it. It tilted the light down, pointing it directly at the camera 3 lens. The feed went white. I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the screen. The white filled the monitor, too bright, washing out everything else. Then camera 3 came back. The corridor was empty. The other 3 feeds returned to normal at the same time, all of them showing the same empty shelving and flat overhead light I'd been watching for hours. I realized I'd been holding my breath again. I let it out. Behind me, the monitor station door handle turned. I didn't open the door. I grabbed the folding chair and shoved it under the handle, wedging the legs against the floor. The chair held. I turned back to the cameras. Camera 1 covered the exterior of the monitor station door. The figure from corridor 3 was standing in front of it now, facing the camera. Still wearing my face. Still smiling. It tried the door handle once, casual, like it was checking whether the door was locked rather than trying to force it open. The figure cupped its hands around its mouth and spoke through the monitor station door. I heard my own voice. My exact voice. Not an imitation. Not close. The same pitch. The same rhythm. The words shaped the way I shaped them. Herman told me to come in from the cold. I took the fire extinguisher mounted beside the loading dock panel. It was the only heavy object in the room. I stood between the door and the panel, holding it in both hands. The loading dock panel lit up again. This time it wasn't a simple unseal warning. It was running a full open cycle. The status indicator was counting down. 90 seconds. The card's override code could cancel a seal attempt, but it couldn't interrupt a full open cycle once it started. It could only cancel it before it completed. I made the choice in under 2 seconds. I ran to the panel and hammered 1988 into the keypad. The cycle canceled. 11 seconds remaining on the countdown. The panel went dark. I turned back to camera 1. The exterior door was empty. I checked all 4 feeds in sequence. Nothing visible in any corridor. The shelving sat flat and undisturbed under the overhead lights. I didn't sit down. I stood in the center of the monitor station with the fire extinguisher and watched the cameras. At 3:58 in the morning, the sounds from Cold Room 5 stopped completely. For the first time since 2:05, the far end of the building went quiet. The silence was different from the refrigeration hum, which had been constant since I'd arrived. This was the absence of something that had been present for nearly 2 hours. A space where sound used to be. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the loading dock sealed. A deep mechanical thunk, like a vault door closing. The panel went dark on its own. All 4 camera feeds switched to a wider angle at the same time, showing an empty building. The corridors stretched out under the flat overhead light, the shelving undisturbed. I sat down on the floor with the fire extinguisher in my lap. At 4:15, Herman arrived through a side entrance I'd never been shown. A plain metal door in the east wall set back from the main corridor. I heard it open, heard his footsteps cross the concrete floor. He appeared in the doorway of the monitor station and looked at me sitting on the floor. "How'd it go?" he asked. I told him about the figure on camera 3, the dock override, my name coming from inside Cold Room 5. I told it in the order it happened, one event after another, no extra commentary. Herman listened to each item and nodded at each one. He didn't look surprised. He asked only one question. "Did you open Cold Room 5? "No," I said. "Good." He handed me a white envelope. I could feel the cash inside, the flat rectangular weight of bills, $200. He turned and left through the same side door. I heard his footsteps recede across the concrete, heard the door close, heard a car start outside and drive away. I stood alone in the monitor station holding the white envelope. The fire extinguisher was still on the floor where I'd set it. Outside, Herman's car pulled away into the dark. I drove east on Route 40 with both hands on the wheel and the envelope of cash sitting on the passenger seat where I could see it. The road was empty. The sky was starting to lighten at the edges, that flat gray that comes before sunrise. And I kept my speed steady at 60 because going faster would have meant thinking less about the wheel and more about what I'd just left behind. The Waffle House appeared on the south side of Urbana, like something I'd summoned by needing it. Yellow sign, bright windows, 2 cars in the lot. I pulled in and parked away from the building, under a light that had burned out. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and cleaning solution. A waitress behind the counter looked up when I came in, nodded, and went back to refilling the napkin dispensers. I took a corner booth near the back, the kind with a view of the whole room and the door. She came over with a menu and a pot of coffee. "Just coffee," I said. She filled the mug and left the pot on the table. I wrapped my hands around the cup and felt the heat through the ceramic, but I didn't drink. The coffee just sat there, steam rising off the surface, while I looked at the table and tried to make my breathing even out. The thing in Corridor 3 had been wearing my jacket, the fraying cuff on the left sleeve, the scuff on my right shoe. I'd bought those shoes 6 months ago at a Goodwill in Kettering, and the scuff had been there when I got them. Nobody else would know that. Nobody else would have a reason to. I looked at my reflection in the window next to the booth. Same face, same jacket. The glass was dark enough that I couldn't see my eyes clearly, just the shape of my head and shoulders, and I turned away from it. The waitress came back after a while and asked if I wanted anything else. I told her no, and she took the pot with her. The coffee had stopped steaming. I pulled out my phone and called Mom. She picked up on the second ring. "Mark?" Her voice was steady, the way it always was, but she'd answered too fast. She'd been awake, waiting. "Hey," I said. "Just got off. Wanted to let you know." "You sound tired." "I'm fine. It went okay." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, the small sounds of her moving around in the kitchen. She was probably making tea. She always made tea when she couldn't sleep. "I found a better paying job," I said. "Warehouse work, cash weekly. Your gas bill's covered this month." Another pause, longer this time. "Mark, baby, you don't have to." "It's covered," I said. "I already set it aside." She didn't argue. She never did. Not about money. She just let out a breath I didn't know she'd been holding and said she was glad. "Get some sleep," she told me. "You sound like you need it." "I will." "I mean it." "I know." We said goodbye and I hung up. The phone screen went dark in my hand and I set it down on the table next to the untouched coffee. That's when I noticed my right hand. 4 lines across the palm, running parallel from the base of my fingers to the heel of my hand. Dark red, almost purple at the edges, the skin raised where the welts had formed. The fire extinguisher's valve handle had bitten in deeper than I'd thought. I could still feel the weight of it in my grip, the cold metal pressing into my palm while I stood in the monitor station and watched the cameras. I flexed my hand, and the welts stretched, a dull ache that went deeper than the bruising. I looked at them for a moment, then put my hand in my lap where I couldn't see it anymore. The waitress came by one more time to ask if the coffee was okay. I told her it was fine and left a $5 bill on the table when I got up to leave. 5 days went by. I worked my shift at the Kroger, stocking shelves and unloading pallets in the back. My print shop route got cut to 4 hours on Saturday mornings instead of the full weekend, which meant I was down $60 a week. The $200 from Reed Falls went to Mom's gas bill and the electric notice that had been sitting on my counter for 3 weeks. By Sunday, the envelope was empty and I was back where I started. That's when Herman texted me. The message came through just after noon. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a plate of eggs I hadn't finished, scrolling through job listings that all wanted experience I didn't have or availability I couldn't give. The text said, "Different site available Thursday. Same work, bigger building, $400 per night while we're short-staffed." I set the phone down and looked at it. $400, 2 weeks of groceries, another month of Mom's gas. Enough to get ahead for once instead of just staying level. I picked the phone back up and put it down again. I'd known the money would win. That wasn't the question. The question was what the thing in Corridor 3 had been trying to tell me by wearing my face. Whether it was a warning to stay away or a test to see if I would. I didn't know. I still didn't know. 20 minutes passed. The eggs got cold on the plate. Outside, someone's car alarm went off and then stopped. I looked at the phone again and unlocked it and typed yes before I could think about it any harder. Herman's reply came back in under a minute. Kellner Cold Storage, east side of Holt, Ohio, Licking County, 40 minutes east of Columbus on US Route 40. There will be a new card when you arrive. I set the phone down on the table with Herman's address on the screen and the 4 bruised welts still visible across my right palm. I arrived at the Holt facility at 9:55, 5 minutes early like Herman told me to be, and pulled into the gravel lot beside a chain-link fence that ran the length of the building. The place was twice as big as Reed Falls, maybe more. A long concrete structure with loading bays on one side and a flat roof that stretched into the dark. 8 corridors instead of 5, 2 monitor stations instead of 1, and at the back, separated from the main floor by what looked like a heavy steel door, a section I could see through the nearest window, stenciled in faded red paint with the word processing. Herman was already waiting by the main entrance, hands in his jacket pockets. Same posture as Reed Falls, like he'd been standing there a long time without minding it. He didn't say hello, just pulled a laminated card from his pocket and handed it to me. This one was longer than the Reed Falls card, printed on both sides, the plastic warm from being in his jacket. "Processing's not your zone tonight," he said. I nodded. "Understood." Herman looked at me for a second, then turned and walked back to his truck without another word. He was in the parking lot less than 4 minutes. I heard the engine start, saw the headlights sweep across the fence, and then he was gone. I sat in my car with the card in my lap and read it before going inside. 9 rules this time. The first 6 were variations on what I already knew. Camera loops meant something was present that didn't show on feed. Intercom protocols for corridor lockdowns. Dock override codes if the seals tried to open early. I recognized the rhythm of it, the same structure as the Reed Falls card, just longer. Rule 7. Do not enter processing under any circumstances. Rule 8. If processing enters you, walk toward the nearest exit without turning around. Rule 9. I read 3 times. If the count of visible figures in any corridor exceeds the number of figures on the previous camera cycle by more than 2, do not attempt to count them again. I folded the card, put it in my jacket pocket, and got out of the car. The building was colder than Reed Falls. Not just the refrigeration hum, which was the same low mechanical drone I'd heard before, but the air itself. It had weight to it, a stillness that didn't feel like it came from the HVAC. The corridors stretched longer than they should have, the shelving half-stocked with shrink-wrapped pallets I couldn't see through. Everything was too clean, too empty, like the place had been scrubbed and left to sit. I found the monitor station and settled in. 2 folding chairs this time, a larger panel, 8 camera feeds split across 2 screens. I pulled the laminated card back out and taped it to the edge of the desk where I could see it without looking down. At 1:15 in the morning, I ran a standard camera check, cycling through all 8 feeds one at a time, noting the timestamp on each one. Camera 6 was looping. The same 4 seconds of empty corridor, over and over. The timestamp frozen at 1:09, the overhead lights steady, the shelving motionless. The card had addressed this. A looping feed meant something was present in that corridor that didn't register on camera. I was not to enter the corridor. I was to press the intercom button for corridor 6 and say that the aisle was closed. I pressed the button. "The aisle is closed," I said. My voice came out steady, flat. I waited. 4 seconds of silence. Then I heard it, the mechanical click of the talk button engaging on the other end. Someone, something, had pressed the intercom button in corridor 6. But no one spoke. The line stayed open. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigeration through the speaker, the same low drone that filled the whole building, but nothing else. No breathing, no movement. The loop continued on camera 6. Same 4 seconds. Same frozen timestamp. I marked corridor 6 closed on my clipboard and didn't look at that feed again. At 2:30, I started the required physical walkdown of corridors 1 through 5. The card said walkdowns were mandatory every 2 hours. I took the flashlight from my jacket pocket even though the overhead lights were on, and started with Corridor 1. Empty. Normal. The shrink-wrapped pallets stacked on steel shelving, the floor clean, the air cold enough that I could see my breath. Corridor 2 was the same. Corridor 3 was the same. Corridor 4 looked normal until I reached the far end. The shelving gave way to a short, dead-end alcove that wasn't on the map Herman had given me. Just a concrete wall and a stretch of open floor about 10 feet deep. 3 men in yellow hard hats stood with their backs to me, all motionless. The posture of the nearest one, the set of his shoulders, the angle of the hard hat, was the same as the man from Reed Falls, the man who had walked through the wall at exactly 1 in the morning. I stopped walking. None of them turned around. None of them reacted to the sound of my footsteps stopping. They just stood there, facing the wall, like they'd been standing there a long time, and would keep standing there whether I was watching or not. I didn't speak. I turned around and walked back the way I'd come, slowly, the same pace I'd used coming in. I didn't run. I kept my breathing steady and my footsteps even, and I walked all the way back to the monitor station without looking over my shoulder. When I got back, I checked camera 4. The alcove was empty. I stared at the feed for a long time, then pulled up the camera history for the last 10 minutes and scrubbed through it frame by frame. The 3 figures appeared for exactly 1 frame. 1 frame out of continuous rolling footage, and in that frame all 3 of them were facing the camera directly, hard hats off, their faces fully visible, identical to one another. I didn't recognize the face, but I could see it clearly. A man in his 50s, lined, tired-looking. I exported the frame to a USB drive from the monitor station's export port, pulled the drive, and put it in my jacket pocket. I didn't look at it again. At 3:10 in the morning, the power cut. Full dark, instant, total. I clicked on the flashlight I'd brought from my car, the one I'd started carrying after Reed Falls, and pointed it at the floor in front of me. The card's rule for a power failure: stay in the monitor station, do not open any door, and count to 100 out loud. I opened my mouth to start counting. Before I could say the first number, I heard the processing section's steel door open. Not close, not from the corridor outside, from the back of the building. The heavy clunk of a steel door on industrial hinges, the sound carrying through the dark like something falling. Then footsteps. A lot of them. Not running, methodical, measured, like a walk down, like someone checking the aisles one by one. I started counting. 1. My voice came out low, steady. I kept the flashlight pointed at the floor. 2, 3, 4. The footsteps moved through Corridor 7, then Corridor 8, then Corridor 5, which was closer, then Corridor 3, which ran right next to the monitor station. 26, 27, 28. One set of footsteps stopped directly outside the monitor station door. I kept counting. I couldn't hear anything from that set. No breathing, no shifting weight. Just the absence of footsteps where a moment ago there had been footsteps. 53, 54, 55. The other sets kept moving. Corridor 2 now, then Corridor 1, spreading out through the building like they were looking for something. 81, 82, 83. The set outside my door didn't move. 97, 98, 99, 100. The power came back on. I checked the camera for the corridor outside the door. Empty. I cycled through all 8 feeds. All empty. I looked at the monitor station door handle. There was frost on the exterior side of the handle. I could see it through the small wire glass window in the door, a smear of frost in the exact shape of a palm and 4 fingers, like someone had pressed a very cold hand against the metal from outside. At 3:45, 15 minutes before the docks were scheduled to seal, I noticed that the monitor station's second exit was standing open. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't been near it. I'd assumed it connected to a utility corridor or a storage closet and hadn't thought about it since Herman walked me through the building. Now it was open. Through the doorway, I could see into the processing section. Red emergency lighting, a long room with stainless steel tables and floor drains running the length of the floor. On the tables, personal items arranged in rows, wallets, phones, keychains, shoes set in pairs, dozens of them. At the far end of the room, the processing section's loading dock was cycling open on its own. I could see the exterior loading bay through it, and standing in the bay, motionless, were the 3 men from Corridor 4, yellow hard hats on, facing the doorway where I stood. Looking at me, I turned around. I didn't look back at the processing section. I walked toward the main corridor's exterior door, the one I'd come in through, at a steady pace, not running, not stopping. Behind me, I heard the processing dock seal, a sound like a slow exhale. I didn't turn around. I walked out through the main door, crossed the parking lot, and got in my car. I locked the doors. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and the USB drive in my jacket pocket, watching the facility's main entrance through the windshield, and waited for Herman. Herman arrived just after 4 in the morning. I watched him pull in from where I was sitting in my car with the engine off and the doors locked. He parked, got out, and went into the building without looking my way. I checked the time on my phone. He was inside for 12 minutes. When he came back out, he walked straight to my window. I rolled it down. He handed me an envelope, $400 in cash, same as before. Then he said, processing finished early tonight, that this was unusual, that I should take next week off. His tone was the same as it had been at Reed Falls, informational, no surprise in it anywhere. I asked him what was on those tables in processing. Herman looked at me for a moment before answering, long enough that I thought he might not answer at all. Property of guests who didn't need it anymore, he said. I asked who the guests were. The ones who aren't on the card, he said. Then he got in his truck, a gray Ford F-150 with a Licking County plate, and drove east on Route 40. I watched his taillights until they disappeared. I drove back toward Dayton. I didn't stop at a diner. I didn't call my mother. I drove the full 2 hours in silence with the envelope sitting on the passenger seat and my hands tight on the wheel. The sun was coming up by the time I got home. I parked in front of my building and sat there for a while. The street was empty. The sky was pale and the color was wrong somehow. Or maybe I was just tired. I got out and went upstairs. Inside my apartment, I pulled the USB drive out of my jacket pocket and plugged it into my laptop. The drive mounted. There was a single file on it. It wasn't the image frame I'd exported. The file I exported had been a JPEG, and this was also a JPEG, but the name was different. A long string of numbers I didn't recognize, followed by the date of my first night at Reed Falls. I opened the file. It was a photograph taken inside the Reed Falls monitor station. I could see the camera monitor on the desk, the loading dock panel, the space heater in the corner. In the folding chair, head tipped back, eyes closed, was me. I was asleep. The timestamp embedded in the photograph's metadata read 2:17 a.m. on the Tuesday of my first night at Reed Falls. I wasn't asleep at 2:17 a.m. that night. I was watching the camera 4 feed, watching the padlock on cold room 5. The sounds had started at 2:05 and I didn't take my eyes off that screen until they stopped. I was never not watching. I checked the file properties. The creation date was 3 days before I called the number on the job listing. 3 days before I was hired. 3 days before I'd ever heard of Kellner Cold Storage or Reed Falls or Herman Kennedy. I stared at the screen for a long time. The photograph didn't change. I was still in the chair with my head back and my eyes closed. The timestamp stayed the same. I closed the laptop. I looked at my right hand. The 4 bruised welts across the palm where I'd gripped the fire extinguisher were dark now, almost black in the center. They didn't hurt anymore. They just sat there on my skin like something that had always been there. I sat at my kitchen table with the closed laptop in front of me and my right hand resting in my lap, the 4 bruised welts dark across my palm, and did not open it again.